My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how I became the villain in my own family. For refusing to pass a test I never agreed to take. The last time I stepped into my parents' house for a family dinner, I didn't even make it past the entryway. Nina and her new husband Derek were already sitting in the living room, like guests on a talk show waiting for the host to drag out the accused. My mom stood between me and the front door, arms spread wide, perfume thick in the air, eyes already shiny, like she'd rehearsed her tears. "We need to talk this out as a family," she said. "You can't keep avoiding your sister forever." My skin went cold. I hadn't seen Nina since the coffee shop, since the day she smiled over a latte and told me, "You passed." Since the day I found out her husband had harassed me at our parents' dining table on purpose, because she asked him to. Nina stood up slowly, smoothing her dress, like she was about to give a speech at a wedding, not ambush her little sister. "You owe me an apology," she said, voice calm, almost bored, "for how you reacted, for making everything about you. Derek and I were just trying to protect their marriage. By instructing her husband to stare at my chest, comment on my body, call me lucky in that oily tone while my parents pretended not to hear and my brother scrolled on his phone. By turning my discomfort into data points in some sick loyalty test. "I owe you nothing," I whispered, but my voice shook. Nina tilted her head. "You seduced James, and you almost did the same thing with Derek. We needed to know if you could be trusted around my husband. You should be grateful you passed this time." James, her first husband, the man I'd caught on their bed, surrounded by my stolen underwear, confessing that he'd only married Nina to get closer to me. The man I'd put a restraining order on. The man who called my sister a stepping stone to my face. Back then, Nina had thrown him out. Now, years later, she was looking me in the eye and saying it was partly my fault. My mother nodded along, jaw tight. "After everything that happened with James, your sister deserves peace of mind. You should understand that. Be thankful she trusted you enough to test you." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was quieter, like a thread finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. I realized I was done being the family's experiment, the scapegoat, the temptation they could all project their fears onto. "I'm not your test subject," I said, stepping around my mom, "and I'm not your stepping stone, not for James, not for Derek, not for anyone." I walked out, slammed the door behind me, and with that one step off their porch, I became exactly what my mother would soon tell the rest of the family I was. The jealous little sister who ruins marriages. The problem. The liar. The truth is so much uglier and so much simpler than that. It started long before Derek's test. It started with James, with missing underwear, with a confession that shattered both our lives, and a blame that never truly left me. And by the time my mom finished rewriting history for our relatives, I wasn't just the villain in my sister's story. I was the monster in everyone's. If you met me today, quiet, self-contained, careful about the space I take up, you might assume I've always been this way. But I used to be different, lighter, softer, more trusting, before my sister rewrote our family history and cast me as the threat lurking in every room. My name is Chloe. I'm 28 and I work in IT support, headset tangled in my hair, fingers always hovering over a keyboard, juggling half-panicked clients while sipping coffee that's always too cold. My boyfriend Ryan travels often for work, but he's the first person who ever made me feel safe in a way that didn't require me to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. Growing up, my family wasn't perfect, but we weren't broken either, or at least we didn't look broken from the outside. My parents liked order, monthly family dinners, holiday traditions, photo albums arranged chronologically and obsessively dusted by my mother. My older sister, Nina, was the golden child. My younger brother, Ethan, was the quiet one. And I was the middle piece they never quite figured out how to categorize. But back then, I believed we were close. Believed Nina loved me the way big sisters do in movies. She used to braid my hair while we talked about school gossip. We shared clothes. We whispered secrets at night like the world outside our bedroom didn't exist. I would have trusted her with anything. Maybe that's why everything hurt so much more later. Nina married young the first time, 28, glowing, excited, head over heels for James, a man I introduced to her. Back then, I thought I was doing something good. He worked with me, a quiet, polite guy who always held the elevator door open and remembered everyone's coffee order. He seemed perfect for her. Within 6 months, they were married. Within 3, my life unraveled. When my landlord sold my building unexpectedly, Nina and James offered me their spare bedroom. I paid rent. I cleaned. I stayed out of their way. And still, James fixated on me. The missing underwear, the noises I heard when I came home early, his voice saying my name, the sight of him sitting on their bed surrounded by my things he stole, the way his face changed when I walked in, the confession that followed. I married Nina to get close to you. She was a stepping stone. Those words burned into me, into both of us. Nina threw him out that night. I stood beside her, shaking, thinking we were united in horror. I filed a police report. I got a restraining order. I begged her to believe none of this was my fault. And for a while she did, or she pretended to. But something inside her cracked, and over time, that crack widened. When she met Derek a year later, she seemed happy again. Rebuilt, confident. I was relieved. I wanted her life to return to normal. I wanted us to return to normal. I didn't know she'd been quietly rewriting the past, turning James's obsession into my seduction, turning her pain into ammunition she could use against me, turning my trauma into suspicion hanging over my head forever. And when she remarried, that suspicion followed us into every family dinner. At first, the signs were small. Nina watching me a little too closely when Derek spoke, her tension whenever he laughed at one of my jokes. But she never said anything, and I never imagined she would ever suspect me of that. I didn't know she'd told our mother she was scared I'd repeat history. I didn't know Derek had already been interrogated about whether he found me attractive. I didn't know I had become a threat in my own home, in my own family. And then came the September dinner, the night Derek looked at me too long, said too much, and Nina waited like a scientist observing a rat in a maze she'd built herself. The night I didn't know I was being tested. The night everything changed. Because once suspicion enters a family, it doesn't leave gently. It spreads. It festers. It rewrites every memory you thought was safe. And in Nina's mind, the story of James had a different villain. Me. But the truth is much more complicated and much more devastating than that. It always is. If someone had asked me 6 months ago whether Nina and I had any lingering tension, I would have said no. That we'd moved past James. That we were rebuilding. That pain didn't have to permanently reshape blood ties. But looking back now, the signs were everywhere, scattered like small red flags I refused to pick up. It started with little comments Nina made in passing. Things I brushed off because I didn't want to believe she meant anything by them. "You look different lately," she'd say, scanning my outfit like she was evaluating competition rather than her own sister. Or, "Derek says you're funnier around him than around me. Isn't that strange?" I'd laugh it off every time, pretending I didn't hear the brittle edge in her voice, pretending her eyes didn't linger on me a little too long when Derek entered the room, pretending I didn't sense the sudden stiffness in her shoulders whenever he and I had a normal, harmless conversation about work or travel or weather. At dinners, I'd catch her watching us. Not talking, not joining in, just watching, as if waiting for proof of something she already believed. More than once, Derek would be telling a story and he'd glance my way instinctively. People often look around a room when they speak, but Nina would go stone still at the slightest flicker of his eyes. Once she even snapped, "Why are you looking at her when you're talking to me?" He laughed nervously. I tried to disappear inside my seat. Another time she told me, half joking but not really, "If you ever betray me, Chloe, I'll know." I remember feeling a strange chill at that, but I brushed it away. Sisters tease, sisters joke, sisters say dramatic things. Except she wasn't joking, not even a little. Then there were the phone calls with my mom. Conversations I didn't realize were rehearsing a narrative without me. "Your sister is fragile after what James did to her," Mom said once. "Be mindful of boundaries." I blinked. "What boundaries?" "Just be careful not to confuse things, with Derek around." I didn't understand. I wasn't doing anything. I barely talked to him. But my mother had absorbed a warped version of the past, one where I played a role I never auditioned for. Even Ethan, sweet, oblivious Ethan, seemed uneasy for the first time after Nina's wedding. At one dinner, he nudged me and whispered, "Why is Nina looking at you like you're a cryptid sighting?" I shrugged. Maybe she's stressed. But the truth was spreading through the family like smoke, thin at first, easy to ignore, until it fills the room and you realize you've been choking for months. And then came the August honeymoon, 6 weeks where I didn't see them. 6 weeks where I lived my life without hearing Nina's sharp little questions or seeing her eyes flick to Derek whenever I spoke. And maybe that's when she cracked. Maybe distance didn't make her heart grow fonder. Maybe it fed her paranoia. Because after they returned, she didn't greet me like a sister. She studied me like an enemy. And Derek, he was tense too. Fidgety, overly polite in a way that didn't match how he'd always acted before. As if there were conversations happening behind closed doors, as if Nina had been examining him, testing him, accusing him, and he'd been scrambling to prove his innocence. It was a pressure cooker dynamic, and I was the uninvited ingredient, the threat, the ghost of a trauma Nina refused to heal. Something was coming. I could feel it, like static before a storm. And when the September dinner arrived, I walked right into her experiment without even knowing. Nothing about that night was accidental. Not Derek's glances, not his comments, not Nina's silence, not my family's stillness. The conflict had already begun. I just hadn't realized I was the subject of a test I never agreed to take. The September family dinner should have been harmless. Boring, even. The same casserole my mom always made. The same awkward jokes from my dad. The same predictable rhythm our family clung to, like a ritual we were too afraid to break. But this time something was off. Derek and Nina arrived later than usual. When they walked in, Nina looked composed, almost serene, while Derek looked like he hadn't slept in days. His smile was thin, forced, twitchy. He kept adjusting the collar of his shirt like it was strangling him. I didn't think much of it at first. People have off days. But then dinner began. It started with a glance. Not the casual kind, but one that lingered a beat too long. I felt it before I saw it. The prickling sensation on the side of my face. The way my heartbeat tightened as if warning me. When I finally looked up, Derek's eyes were already on me. Not flirtatious, not kind, just watchful. Like he was waiting to see how I'd react to something. I turned back to my plate, trying to ignore the unease curling low in my stomach. Minutes passed. Small talk drifted around the table. Weather, work, Ethan's new girlfriend. I reached for my water, and Derek spoke. "I like your hair tonight, Chloe." I froze. Everyone froze. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Soft, deliberate, as if we were alone, as if he wanted everyone to hear. Nina didn't blink. I laughed awkwardly. Thanks. Seconds later, he tried again. "You look really good in that dress." This time the room felt colder. My mother stabbed her fork into her food. Ethan kept scrolling on his phone, pretending not to listen, but clearly absorbing everything. My dad cleared his throat, but said nothing. And Nina sat still, calm, blank, observing. "Have you been working out?" Derek continued, voice lowering. "Your figure looks great." My fingers tightened around my napkin. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. "Derek," I said quietly, "that's inappropriate." He just smiled. "I'm giving you a compliment." Nina didn't flinch. She didn't glare at him. She didn't defend me. She simply watched me with a gaze so steady, it felt like pressure on my skin. "I need some air," I muttered, pushing back my chair. As I stood, Derek added one more comment. Quiet, but intentionally loud enough for the table to hear. "Ryan is a lucky guy." My stomach twisted, my breath stuttered. This wasn't normal. This wasn't Derek slipping up. This was deliberate. The air felt too heavy to breathe as I grabbed my purse and left. I barely made it to my car before my hands started trembling. I sat there in the darkness, fingers pressed against my forehead, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Why would he say those things? In front of everyone? In front of Nina? Why didn't she react? Why did it feel like they were waiting for me to do something, say something, prove something? The next morning, still sick to my stomach, I texted Nina. "Derek's comments made me uncomfortable. Can we talk? I don't want this to be weird between us." Hours passed. Nothing. That evening, "Hey, can we please talk? I'm not mad. I just want to clear the air." Finally, one message. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow?" I felt relief. Maybe she understood. Maybe she was embarrassed by Derek's behavior. Maybe we could fix this before it fractured into something bigger. I didn't know then that she wasn't reaching out to repair anything. She was meeting me to reveal the truth. I hadn't walked into a dinner. I had walked straight into a test. Her test. And I was about to find out exactly how deeply my sister's paranoia had twisted her sense of reality and her sense of loyalty. The next day, I walked into the coffee shop rehearsing apologies that weren't mine to give. I expected Derek to be there too, ready to mutter something awkward, maybe embarrassed, maybe sheepish. I expected Nina to be upset, hurt, maybe defensive, but at least grounded in the idea that something inappropriate had happened. Instead, she sat alone, perfectly calm, stirring her latte as if nothing in the world required urgency. "Hey," I said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." She smiled, warm, almost affectionate. It put me slightly at ease, until she opened her mouth. "You passed." My brain stalled. "Passed what?" "The test," she said, as if discussing a quiz in high school. "Derek's comments. I asked him to do it." My throat went dry. A faint ringing filled my ears. "You what?" "I needed to know if you would try to seduce him," she explained lightly, sipping her drink with the serene confidence of someone delivering good news, "like you did with James." A dizzy nausea hit me so hard the room tilted. "Nina," I whispered, "I never seduced James. He was obsessed with me. He admitted that, in front of you." Her expression hardened, but only for a second. "Maybe. But men don't become obsessed for no reason. Something had to make him feel like he had a chance." I stared at her, unable to process the cruelty of what she was implying. "You think I encouraged him?" She shrugged. "I think you're more attractive than you realize. And I think you forget boundaries sometimes." My chest tightened, breath shallow. "So you told Derek to harass me? To talk about my body? To flirt in front of everyone?" "It wasn't harassment," Nina said sharply. "It was a test. You should be grateful. You passed. You didn't flirt back. You told me. That means I can trust you around my husband." "Trust me?" My voice cracked. "After humiliating me? After setting me up? You're overreacting." That phrase, so familiar, so weaponized, hit me like a slap. "I told Mom what we planned," Nina added, like that tidbit would soothe me. She agreed it was reasonable. My stomach turned. "So Mom knew Derek would hit on me all dinner long?" "She knew the general idea," Nina said. "She just wanted to protect me. After what happened with James, you have to understand." "No," I whispered, trembling. "I don't." A silence stretched between us, thick, heavy, suffocating. "You should apologize," Nina said finally, her tone crisp, rehearsed. "For storming out, for making a scene, for acting like we did something wrong." My vision blurred with hot, stunned tears I refused to let fall. "I'm done," I said, standing so quickly my chair screeched. "Delete my number." Her eyes widened. "Chloe." "I never want to see you again." I walked out before she could respond. My legs carried me on autopilot until I reached my car, where the composure finally cracked. I cried the entire drive home, shaking, gripping the steering wheel too tightly, breath hitching in broken gasps. I wasn't crying just because of what she'd done. I was crying because for the first time I realized something terrifying. My sister didn't see me as family anymore. She saw me as a threat, a rival, a danger to her marriage, a woman who needed to be tested and controlled. And my mother, my own mother, had stood behind her. When I got home, I video called Ryan. He was in Singapore, exhausted and worried, but listening closely as I told him everything. His expression shifted from confusion to disgust to anger. "She used your trauma against you," he said. "Chloe, this is abuse." "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "Yes, you do," he said. "You already walked out. That's step one." He was right, but right didn't make the grief any softer, because losing a sister isn't sudden. It happens slowly, painfully, like watching someone you love dissolve into a stranger while you're still reaching out your hands, trying to hold on to the version of them you once knew. In the days after the coffee shop ambush, my world split into two versions of itself. The one where I'd grown up believing family protected each other, and the one where my own family had knowingly arranged my humiliation like a science experiment. And the version I lived in now? It felt colder, sharper, unfamiliar. I texted my parents and Ethan that night. I wanted to be calm, rational, factual. Instead, the words poured out like someone breaking open a dam. "Nina asked Derek to flirt with me. It wasn't an accident. It was a test. She thinks I seduced James. She thinks I might try to seduce Derek." My dad called within minutes, voice tight with anger. "What? No, Chloe, no, that's insane." I could hear him pacing. He does that when he's furious, but trying to contain it. "I didn't know," he said. "Your mother didn't tell me. If I had known, I would have shut that down immediately." But my mom responded differently. When she called later that evening, I already felt the tension through the phone. "Sweetheart, listen. Nina is traumatized after what James did. You need to understand her fears." "Nina's fears?" My voice rose. "She weaponized my trauma. She used Derek to test me. She made me feel unsafe in our own home." My mother exhaled sharply, frustrated. "You're taking this too personally. It was just a test. Just a test. Just harassment. just being objectified and cornered at the dinner table while the entire family pretended not to notice. She needed reassurance, Mom continued. And you proved yourself. Why can't you be grateful you passed? The words felt like knives twisting in my ribs. I hung up on her. Ethan texted next. I knew something felt weird. I just didn't know what. He added a second message. I'm sorry you went through that. Short but real. Ethan never uses 10 words when 2 will do. He was the only one who didn't try to rewrite what happened. The family dinner in October approached like a storm cloud. I told my parents I wasn't coming if Nina and Derek were there. My dad replied, I understand. Stay home. My mom replied, You're overreacting. Family matters. So I didn't go. And for the first time, the monthly ritual, something that had existed for years, splintered. But November was the breaking point. I arrived with cautious optimism, hoping the evening would be quiet, hoping my mother had honored my boundary. Instead, I walked inside and found Nina and Derek sitting in the living room like they were waiting for me. My body went cold instantly. Before I could turn around, my mom stepped in front of the door. We're talking this out, she said. No more drama. My pulse hammered. The walls felt too close. My breath caught. Nina stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles on her skirt. You owe me an apology, she said gently, as if I were the one who had lost my mind. I was protecting my marriage. You're being selfish. My jaw trembled. You humiliated me. You blamed me for what your ex-husband did. You made Derek sexually harass me. It wasn't harassment, Nina corrected. It was a test, and you should take responsibility for the role you played with James. There it was again. The rewrite. The lie she needed to believe so she didn't have to confront her own trauma. My mom folded her arms. She's right, Chloe. You need to stop twisting things. You passed. Let's move on. Move on. Move on from being violated twice, by 2 different men, under 2 different circumstances, only to be blamed for both. Move on from a sister who saw me as a threat. Move on from a mother who saw me as collateral. I stepped past them, jaw clenched, voice steady even as my hands shook. I'm done. Don't contact me again, either of you. My dad followed me out to the driveway, voice cracking as he apologized. I swear I didn't know, he said. Your mother went behind my back. I believed him, but believing him didn't erase the betrayal. I drove home in silence, chest aching, grief settling deep inside me like sediment. That night, Ryan cut his work trip short. He showed up at my apartment with tired eyes, open arms, and anger simmering beneath the surface. You're not dealing with this alone, he said, pulling me into him. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself collapse. Because the truth was impossible to avoid now. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just family tension. This was the unraveling of everything I had ever believed about my sister, my mother, and the home I grew up in. And the breaking hadn't even reached its darkest moment yet. In the weeks that followed, silence became its own kind of violence. I went low contact with everyone except my dad and Ethan. My mother tried calling twice, then stopped. Nina didn't reach out at all. It was as if I had committed a crime and the family had collectively agreed that the punishment was isolation. And yet, even with all the distance, the damage kept spreading, reaching places in me I didn't know were still breakable. The worst part wasn't the test. It wasn't Derek's comments. It wasn't even Nina suggesting I'd somehow deserved what James did years ago. It was the realization that 2 people I had loved my entire life, my mother and my sister, trusted their delusions more than they trusted me. That thought haunted me, waking me at 3 a.m. with my chest tight, my breath shallow, my mind racing. Maybe if I'd moved out sooner, maybe if I'd confronted James earlier, maybe if I'd been a different kind of daughter, a different kind of sister. Grief twists the truth that way. It convinces you to search for mistakes you never made. December arrived cold and gray. Ryan insisted we try one last meeting with the family, not for reconciliation, but for closure. You deserve to hear everything out loud, he said. You deserve to confront them with honesty. I agreed, reluctantly, fearfully. We walked into my parents' living room together. My mother, my father, Nina, Derek, and Ethan all sat in a half circle like a jury, waiting for the defendant. Me, always me. Nina repeated everything she'd said before, only colder this time, more rigid. You must have led James on. Normal men don't behave that way for no reason. Derek admitted he only did the test because Nina kept accusing him of looking at me too much. He couldn't even meet my eyes. My mother confirmed she had known all along. Your sister needed reassurance, and you're strong enough to handle something like that. Strong enough to be publicly harassed. Strong enough to be blamed for being preyed upon. Strong enough to absorb trauma quietly, so they could maintain their comfortable narrative. I looked straight at her. You let him harass your daughter at the dinner table. My mother's jaw tightened. Stop embellishing. It wasn't harassment. My father looked sick. Ethan stared at the floor. I won't speak to you again until you apologize, I said, voice soft but final. All of you. A real apology. One that acknowledges what actually happened. My mother scoffed. Nina shook her head. Derek stayed silent. No one apologized, so I walked out, again. But this time, something inside me didn't shatter. It simply went quiet. After that day, the distance became permanent. My mother doubled down on her narrative, calling relatives and painting me as the villain, the seducer, the ungrateful daughter, tearing the family apart. My Aunt Laura called and spewed accusations so vicious I had to hang up mid-sentence. My mother had poisoned the entire family tree. Word spread fast, rumors faster. By April, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years had already formed opinions about me. None of them based on truth. For days, I lay awake, replaying every version of events in my head, looking for some hidden moment where I had accidentally allowed any of this to happen. But the truth remained, steady and devastating. I had done nothing. Nothing except exist in a body men had projected fantasies onto. Nothing except be a sister to someone who wanted a scapegoat more than she wanted healing. Nothing except be a daughter who expected honesty from a mother who preferred control. The lowest moment came one night when Ryan found me on the bathroom floor, curled into myself, sobbing, whispering, "Why wasn't I worth believing?" He held me for hours. "You were worth believing," he whispered. "They just weren't capable." But grief doesn't listen to reason. It only listens to the echoes of the people who failed you. And at that point, the echoes of my mother and sister were louder than anything else. I had never felt so alone, so misunderstood, so deeply cut by the people who were supposed to protect me. This was the bottom, the breaking point. And I didn't know it yet, but hitting this bottom was the very thing that would begin shifting everything. The relationships, the power, the truth. Rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the turning point. Hitting bottom doesn't feel like a crash. It feels like stillness, quiet, dangerous stillness, where you suddenly recognize that nothing left to lose is also nothing left to fear. That's where I was the morning everything shifted. It began with a phone call from my dad. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. "Just us." We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. When he walked in, he looked older, tired in a way I'd never seen. The lines on his forehead seemed deeper, his shoulders heavier. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around a mug he didn't drink from. "I need you to know something," he said. "Your mother is rewriting things, not just to the family, to herself. She refuses to admit she made a mistake." I swallowed hard, I know. "No," he said gently, "you don't. She's telling people you seduced James, that Derek exposed you at dinner, that you screamed and caused a scene. None of that happened." My heart clenched. Why is she doing this? He hesitated. "Because if she admits Nina was wrong, she has to face the fact that she didn't protect you back then, and she didn't protect you now." There it was, the truth behind the lies. My mother wasn't defending Nina. She was defending herself. From guilt, from shame, from acknowledging that she failed her daughter twice in the same exact way. My dad continued, "I've confronted her. She won't change her story." That hurt. It hurt more than I expected, because somewhere deep down, I still wanted her to choose me. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Something steadied inside me then. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just clarity. My mother would rather rewrite reality than face accountability. My sister would rather believe a fantasy than confront her trauma. I could not save them. I could not fix them. And I was not obligated to keep bleeding for their comfort. After the diner, I drove home feeling calmer than I had in months. Not lighter, but clearer, cleaner. Like the fog had finally thinned. That evening, Ryan and I talked about our future. For the first time, the conversation didn't feel overshadowed by the weight of my family. We'd been quietly planning our September wedding. Small, intimate, peaceful. But now, with the family chaos echoing in the background, Ryan asked, "What if we didn't wait?" I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "What if we stop letting this shadow hang over us? What if we start our life now, on our terms?" His words struck something sharp and bright inside me. For months, my life had revolved around trying to make sense of the people tearing me apart. But here was someone building me back together, gently, without asking anything in return. I realized I'd been waiting for the wrong kind of closure, waiting for apologies that would never come, waiting for my mother to wake up and see me, waiting for Nina to step out of her paranoia, waiting for the family I used to have to magically reappear. But that family didn't exist anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the tragedy I once thought it was. The turning point wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even emotional. It was simple. I stopped waiting. I chose myself. We decided to cancel the September wedding. We went to the courthouse in May, signed the papers, exchanged rings, kissed under a cheap fluorescent light, and celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant. We didn't tell anyone until after. Ryan's parents sent flowers and cried happy tears over the phone. My father said he wished he'd been there, but understood. Ethan texted, "Proud of you. You deserve this." And for the first time in my adult life, I felt something unfamiliar but grounding. Peace. But life has a way of delivering truth even after you think you're done with it. Because shortly after our courthouse wedding, my dad told me something I didn't expect. Nina had a baby girl. A baby born into a marriage built on insecurity, fear, and suspicion. A baby who would grow up hearing a version of me that wasn't true. And strangely, instead of sorrow or guilt or anger, I felt nothing. Neutrality, detachment, release. Whatever bond I once had with Nina had ended long before that child was born. I didn't know it then, but I was already stepping into the next chapter, the one where the consequences of their choices, not mine, would finally collapse back onto the people who created them. The fallout was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be standing in the blast radius. When people talk about karma, they imagine something loud, dramatic, cinematic, a lightning bolt from the sky. But in real life, karma arrives quietly, slowly, patiently. It walks on soft feet and waits for the right moment to turn everything upside down. For Nina and my mother, that moment came long after I had already stepped away. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't expose them on social media. I didn't confront the relatives who believed their lies. I simply removed myself, and the absence of the person they used as a scapegoat created a void they could no longer fill with fiction. It began with the wedding invitations. Ryan and I mailed save the dates to only 3 groups: my dad, Ethan, and his family in California. We didn't send one to my mother or to Nina and Derek. 2 weeks later, my Aunt Laura called, furious enough that her breathing crackled through the phone. "How dare you try to get married after what you did to Nina?" "What I did?" I asked calmly. "You seduced James, then tried again with Derek. Your mother told me everything." Her voice trembled with self-righteousness. Mine stayed level. "I'm hanging up now," I said, and did. That evening I called my dad. He sighed, long and tired, then confessed what I already suspected. My mother had spent the last months telling relatives I'd nearly destroyed 2 marriages. She painted me as a vindictive seductress, a jealous sister, a woman who failed Nina's test and lashed out. A complete rewrite of reality, so polished it made me wonder how long she'd been rehearsing it. Dad confronted her. She refused to retract a single lie. "She said she was protecting Nina," he told me quietly. "She said you have Ryan now, so you'll be fine." There it was. My mother had chosen her narrative over her daughter. So I called her one last time. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. "I'm done," I said simply. "You don't get another chance." She burst into tears instantly. "Chloe, please, don't do this. I was just trying to help your sister feel secure." "You didn't help her," I replied. "You fed her delusion, and you sacrificed me to do it." She kept crying, begging, bargaining. I hung up and blocked her number. That should have been the end, but consequences have a way of circling back. The following month, I asked my dad to deliver a letter to Nina. Not an olive branch, just closure. In it, I wrote, "I'm sorry for what James did to you, but I'm not sorry for leaving. You need help, and I can't be the person you blame anymore." I ended it with a final truth. "You're no longer my sister." After reading it, Nina didn't respond. She didn't apologize. She didn't reach out. She stayed silent. Because she needed the delusion more than she needed me. And then came the shift. My dad and Ethan continued meeting me weekly. At first, guilt draped over them like a heavy blanket. Being caught between us was tearing them apart. But over time, something changed. They stopped making excuses for my mother, stopped trying to keep the peace, stopped pretending this was temporary. They chose honesty, even when it was painful. My dad once said, staring into his coffee, "Your mother and we're not the same anymore. I can't trust her judgment. I can't trust her with the truth." Ethan echoed it later. "She asks about you all the time. She cries. But she never admits what she did. She wants forgiveness without responsibility." They were watching her crumble under the weight of her own lies. and I wasn't part of it anymore. Meanwhile, Nina's life kept moving without me. New marriage, new baby. But happiness built on suspicion doesn't last. Ethan told me that Nina once asked him, "Do you think Chloe still talks about me?" When he said, "She doesn't talk about you at all," Nina simply nodded. No anger, no sadness, just acceptance of the distance she created. Her obsession with guarding her marriage hadn't protected anything. It had cost her the one relationship she took for granted, me. The fallout didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward, into their home, their marriage, their dinner table, their holiday gatherings, where my empty chair became its own kind of accusation. My mother lost a daughter, Nina lost a sister, and Derek lost the illusion that his wife's obsession had ever been about him. Oddly, the person who lost the least was me, because what I gained was so much heavier than what I left behind. Clarity, boundaries, a partner who stood beside me through every storm, a new family who welcomed me without suspicion or tests, a peace I never believed I would feel again. The fallout wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, inevitable, deserved. It landed exactly where it belonged, on the people who caused the destruction in the first place, not on me. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It didn't sweep into my life like a revelation or a dramatic movie montage. It came slowly, quietly, like sunlight slipping through the blinds after a long night you weren't sure would end. It came through small, steady moments. Ryan and I building a home together that felt safe in a way my childhood home never truly was. Cooper, our golden retriever, curling against my legs every morning, like he sensed exactly where the empty spaces were and wanted to fill them with warmth. My dad showing up for coffee every week without fail, never missing, never rescheduling, like he was teaching me, little by little, that consistency can still exist in a world where trust has been shattered. Even Ethan joining us sometimes, sitting across the table with his quiet loyalty, reminding me that not everything in my family was broken. Not everyone had chosen delusion over truth. Healing looked like that. It also looked like what wasn't there anymore. No more last-minute calls from Nina pulling me into the emotional gravity of her insecurities. No more tests designed to prove I wasn't a danger to my own family. No more guilt weaponized against me by a mother who couldn't face her own complicity. No more versions of myself twisted into villains in stories I never got to tell. For the first time in years, my life wasn't shaped by their expectations or their paranoia. It was shaped by my choices, my boundaries, my truth. Sometimes I still think about the sister I used to have. The girl who drove 2 hours to pick me up when my car broke down. The girl who stayed up late with me eating pizza on the floor of my first apartment. The girl who held my hand during storms because I hated thunder. But that version of Nina doesn't exist anymore, and loving a memory is not the same as holding on to a person who keeps hurting you. Other times, I think about my mother, and I wait, just to see if guilt will rise again like it used to. It never does, because guilt only survives when you believe you've done something wrong. And I finally understand something that took me years of pain to learn. Walking away is not betrayal. Protecting yourself is not cruelty. Refusing to be a scapegoat is not selfishness. And losing people who refuse to respect your truth is not a tragedy. It is liberation. If there is a lesson here, one I wish someone had taught me sooner, it's this. Family is not defined by DNA. Family is defined by who refuses to harm you, and by who chooses to stay when everything else falls apart. I mourn the mother and sister I thought I had, but I am building a life with the family I actually have, Ryan, Cooper, my dad, and Ethan. People who show up, people who listen, people who don't need to test my loyalty because they never doubted it in the first place. I don't know if forgiveness will ever come. Maybe someday my heart will soften. Maybe it won't. But forgiveness isn't a door I owe anyone access to. It's something I might choose to unlock for my own peace, not theirs. For now, my story continues forward, without the people who mistook my kindness for weakness. And if anyone watching this has ever carried the weight of someone else's fears, if you've ever been scapegoated, blamed, or tested for sins that were never yours, I hope you hear this clearly. You deserve better. You deserve safety. You deserve a life rooted in truth, not in someone else's lies. You're allowed to walk away, and walking away can be the beginning of everything.